your series from the West Bank that, you spoke to Israeli refusers, you spoke to civilians, people living in the town of Hebron, and you spoke to Had Tamimi and you wrote a book with her. We'll talk about that book in just a little bit, but I did just want to play everybody a portion of Dena's reporting, and this was the piece that did win her this Peabody, and you can see why. Have a link to the entire that reporting in the bio there. I did protest with your dad on another assault on Gaza.
2014.
So I feel very close to him and the family, but tell us, Dena, about, I mean, I know there's updates about what's going on in Hebron, because what's not getting as much attention is the amount of settler violence that has popped off just in the last 6 weeks since the beginning of the war. So yeah, what have you heard? And also, like, what does it mean for a city that is slowly being encroached upon by settlements, by the Israeli military? What does that do? And what did you hear and witness?
That was probably one of the most depressing days of my life, going there. And it wasn't the first time I'd been to Hebron, but I went knowing my dad kind of grew up around there, not realizing it was literally in this neighborhood. And you saw how the day started out. This was, by the way, this was a year ago. So this is well before October 7th. This is the reality on the ground for Palestinians that live in the occupied West Bank. Swarmed by Israeli soldiers, harassed, detained, later on attacked by an Israeli settler, later on, having a conversation with another Israeli settler from Brooklyn who told me there's no such thing as Palestinians, speaking to a Palestinian girl who every time she and her name is Selwa, 13 years old, every time she and her siblings play right outside of their home, settlers throw rocks at them, hit them in the face. They have nets above their house to catch the trash and the rocks and everything that, these settlers that live there in violation of international law constantly throw down at them. It is one of the most depressing places on earth. And when I came back from that assignment, I couldn't look at the footage for a while. I was traumatized, and you see that trauma playing out on screen in that one day we filmed. Hamid Safin, your former colleague you had on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Kate Elston, also your former producer, produced this. This is their Peabody as well, and they recognized how hard it was for me I had to step away from it, and they really took the lead. What was a horrible situation to start out with in terms of Hebron is even worse right now. It is on complete lockdown. What we've seen Israel do since October 7th is just carry out massive collective punishment against the Palestinian population at large, both in Gaza with the constant bombardments and in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem with mass arrests and raids, the increase in checkpoints, the increase in, just making the Palestinians' lives there hell. In that neighborhood in Hebron, there are 700 Israeli settlers living there, and they get full military protection. Meanwhile, the 35,000 Palestinians can be shot right now if they step outside. And what they're saying is that they've never experienced this type of lockdown, this type of prison. They can't even go outside of their homes. And those that do, I've heard really, really alarming testimonies of Palestinians that are getting arrested, that are getting abused and sexually abused by Israeli soldiers and settlers alike. It is awful.
Sure. I mean, I've tried. There is no corollary in the United States, but we do have gentrification. So it's like, imagine if gentrifiers also had like armed to the teeth, militarized, private security that stopped you and frisked you and like maimed you and threw rocks at you. Like it's just like it's wild. And it's wild that someone would say to your face Palestinians don't exist when they like spend their time harassing them on a daily basis. Sammy, I wanted to bring you in because you are part Palestinian, and I wanted to find out more about where you're from or where your family's from, and have you visited and like
No. My teta's from Jaffa. So she left in 48. She went straight to a refugee camp in Lebanon and then went to Beirut after that. So I've never gone back. I've been asked to go to the West Bank a few times, but it was like really last minute, and I wasn't able to go. So yeah, I have yet to go. But I have a lot of friends in the West Bank, and just aside from everything that's horrible going on both in Gaza and in the West Bank, it's like there's people that they're afraid to even leave their houses, or like I have a friend who lives in Jenin and has a girlfriend in Hebron and can't travel between the two because he's terrified that he'll get killed like along the way, and vice versa.
That's the case for everyone. That is what is happening right now in the West Bank. People don't want to leave their homes. They definitely don't want to leave their towns.
Because they're afraid they're either going to be arrested or violently like assaulted or killed by a settler
on the road, driving. In the safety of a car on a road. You're not even guaranteed that in your own land.
Dena,
or they'll be messed with by soldiers at checkpoints, because there's a huge increase in military checkpoints right now, and the soldier will easily point his gun at you, tell you to get out, might hit you, might whatever. It is just completely unsafe.
Yeah. And how big of a city is Hebron?
It's very big. It's a big town. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's the biggest in the West Bank.
This week also, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it, Biden was saying that they're considering imposing sanctions on any settlers who are attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. They may revoke visas, right? I know there might even be, if you talk to someone from Brooklyn, dual citizens, people who are American citizens who moved, again, I can't even believe that, who've become settlers in the West Bank. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? That was taken as like a, wow, that's a big step. But yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's not a wow. It is nothing. These settlements, like I said, they violate international law. I'm pretty sure they violate US law. So instead of sitting here and targeting individual settlers and saying, oh, well, you don't get a visa waiver, you don't come to the United States, put some red lines on Israel. Tell them no more. Tell them to dismantle these settlements, that are, if people, just to visualize this, we're talking about settlements that are in the West Bank. This is ever decreasing territory that decades of US-led peace negotiations have said this will be part of a future Palestinian state. These Israeli settlers, many of whom do come from America, they did not choose to live in Israel. They chose to live in Palestinian land and harass Palestinian people and take, even more of their ever diminishing land and make their lives there a living hell. And they're not like these fringe whatever people. This current Israeli government is the most pro-settler in Israeli history. These settlers are in the Israeli government, so for Biden to just single out a few people and, issue this caution is really nothing. It's the extent to which he refuses to draw any red lines on Israel, whether it comes to the massacres and atrocities we're seeing in Gaza or to the flagrant human rights abuses we're seeing in the West Bank, it is so disappointing. It is infuriating.
Yeah, no. And I think, again, I've talked about this. We talked about this in many weeks about, he's losing. He's losing with the same young people that put him into office, that voted for him in droves, especially in swing states and especially in the Arab American community, that he will need their vote to win again. And it's just funny because this is also a guy who said he ran for office because of what he saw in Charlottesville and, the sort of the far right, white nationalists. And yet these settlers are they're like enclaves of Kyle Rittenhouses, straight up. You know what I'm saying? They are like vigilante psychos who are supposedly very religious. I don't know look, that's not between them and their God. That doesn't seem very religious to me. UN says 251 settler attacks since October 7th, 30 incidents that resulted in the deaths of Palestinians or injuries, 185 that damaged Palestinian-owned property, 36 that resulted in both injuries or deaths or damage to property. And of course, we can only imagine how much of an undercount that is. But I think one of the most shocking things about the footage and I'm not sure, Dena, did you see settlers in your footage? Because the images of men just with firearms randomly, not part of the military, just settlers shooting and pointing at people was incredibly disturbing. And again, I don't say Kyle Rittenhouse lightly. It feels like that kind of vigilantism.
Yeah, I saw teenage boys like in a school courtyard, right where I was reporting, and they have rifles slung around them. They're all armed. They're
not IDF.
And on top of that, after October 7th, Israel's far-right national security minister, who himself has been convicted of supporting a terrorist organization, further armed them with more rifles. There's videos of those going out.
Francesca, I don't think Rittenhouse is like a fair thing to say, because Rittenhouse was actually from Kenosha.
Right, exactly. But he did cross state lines. But yeah, Dena, you have to go soon, but I do want to talk about your book briefly, as much time as you can give us. They Call Me a Lioness, a Palestinian girl's fight for freedom. Ahed Tamimi's story that you co-wrote with her. You sat down with her, you interviewed her again. And what was the year that she slapped an Israeli soldier who had just shot her cousin and I believe killed her uncle? Tell us briefly. And yeah.
Yeah, so it was December of 2017 when she slapped a fully armed Israeli soldier in front of her home and was subsequently arrested and served 8 months in an Israeli prison for that slap. She turned 17 behind bars. She finished her high school senior year basically behind bars and that final exams there. That soldier or someone from his unit had shot one of her cousins at close range in the head. She believed that he was going to die. He miraculously survived. Since then, he's been shot other times, and he's just not the same. So this is a girl. I mean, this moment was made her sort of iconic and went super viral back in 2017. I interviewed her when she got out of prison. I was one of the first journalists to sit down with her. We established a rapport, and from there, I wrote her book with her. But this is a child who grew up sort of in the spotlight because her village in the West Bank of Nebi Saleh, they live right across the street from an illegal Israeli settlement. Literally, here's their house, there's a valley, and the settlement's right here. And for years, the settlement has been encroaching on her family's land. They confiscated their natural spring, which was their main source of water. And so when she was a young child, her village, led by her father, sort of took up this nonviolent weekly resistance movement where every Friday after the Friday prayer, they would all gather and they would just march, and sometimes they would try to make it down to the spring. And every single week they were met by a fierce and violent and brutal crackdown by the Israeli military. We're talking like tear gas, skunk water, rubber-coated steel bullets, eventually live fire. So before she was even 11 years old, she saw her cousin shot and killed right before her, a long-range tear gas canister straight to his face. And then she saw her favorite uncle killed, on the hillside behind her house. This is the violence, that she grew up surrounded by. She went to prison, she got out, we wrote this book together. It is her story, but it's also the story of modern day Palestine. It's also the story of what it's like to grow up as a child under this occupation, to never know a day of freedom in your life, to only know checkpoints everywhere and a massive, apartheid wall and violence, and just have every single dream of your life cut short. She has never had a normal life. They ruined her life. And unfortunately, on November 6th, yet again, Israeli forces raided her home in the middle of the night and arrested her once again. And she's 22 years old right now. She's inside Detention prison in Israel. She had communication for the first time with a lawyer who was able to meet with her yesterday. I spoke to that lawyer. The lawyer said that, it's been about 2 weeks since her detention, and Ahed says she still has bruises on her body from the abuse she suffered at the hands of her Israeli captors. She has not been charged yet, so she's being held without charge. About a week before she was arrested, her father was arrested also, a longtime activist who Amnesty International one time labeled a prisoner of conscience, just for exercising his right to peacefully protest. He was making his way to Jordan and got arrested there. And that's what Israel's doing right now. They are rounding up so many people, especially former prisoners, and holding them in Israeli prisons. Now, the conditions in these prisons are they were bad to start out with. They have gotten much worse.
Yeah.
The lawyers said that there's not enough food for the girls. The women are in crowded cells without, enough blankets. It's cold. They're being deprived food. They're being deprived any sort of news from the outside. They're living in complete isolation in really terrible conditions.
Yeah.
So, and her father, I don't know if I mentioned, is serving time under administrative detention, which is a designation Israel uses to arrest someone without charge or trial for up to 6 months. You have no idea why you're there. They have a secret file against you, and after 6 months, they can continue to extend it for 6 months. So some Palestinian prisoners end up serving years under administrative detention, never knowing why they're being held.
I mean, and to say nothing of the fact that this is a political and a justice system that Palestinians have no say in, have absolutely no voting rights, no jurisdiction over. Like, they are not represented in that so-called justice system. It is an illegal justice system, and I believe Ahed, when she was finally released, or went like basically said as much. This is an illegal court. So. Yeah, and by the way, they're also detaining. This is a news just today. Mossab Abu Toha, who's a poet,
He's been released, but he was
okay.
Detained. Yeah.
Just like,
but you're right.
The
These
intellectuals, the leaders. Anyway,
Israel tries Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in military courts, okay, where the judge and the prosecution, they're all members of the military. These courts have a conviction rate of close to 100%. There is no due process. There is no fairness. And these, Palestinians are ultimately ruled by Israel, but they're not citizens of the state of Israel. So as you were saying earlier, they cannot vote in elections. Now, here's the crazy part is Ahed is, currently being tried in a military court. If a settler, and we don't know why she's being held, she hasn't been charged yet. So it's effectively an abduction up until now. If a settler, like one of the ones living right across the street from her, were to commit a similar crime, they're tried in Israeli civilian courts, and they have due process. And this is like an example of the dual legal system. That's one of the many examples of what Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem says is apartheid. This is apartheid exemplified.
It's untenable. I mean, I think what we've learned, and I hope everyone has learned that, is that, and this is the thing about, the occupation. It's easy to think that it's just stagnant, that there's just a status quo. There's no status quo. There's no status quo under occupation, because it's always getting worse. There are always more lives taken. There's always more land taken. There are always more bombs being dropped on Gaza every however many years. Like, it doesn't stay the same. So everyone needs to remember that. And it's like, as we go back and just look at the last few years, what's been happening in Gaza, look at the last few years in the West Bank. It's like, no, this is getting worse. It is absolutely untenable. And I just want to, everyone should buy They Call Me a Lioness. Please get this book. It is, yes, Dena, hold it up, but
I'm holding it up.
It is beautifully written and accessible, and something that, again, like, you don't have to, doesn't come from this necessarily a macro, bird's eye, but really through the eyes of Ahed, through the eyes of someone living in the West Bank. And yet, Dena, I found it also super succinct. Like, you get to what you need to get to. You talk about the history. It's like it equips you with what you need to know, but also through this beautiful story of a young girl who, and I love that I didn't really want it. She didn't want all this shine. She didn't want this fame. Of course, she wants to be like a 22-year-old.
Yeah, thank you. And, I really deliberately wrote it in a way that, like you said, is accessible. I wanted this to be a book that anyone who has absolutely zero knowledge of Palestine can pick up and read and understand what's going on today. So I encourage you guys, if you yourselves want to learn, if you know someone, the holiday season's coming up, please buy this book, support Palestinian authors, and support Ahed Tamimi. Don't stop telling her story. And the story, she's one, again, who doesn't like the spotlight, and she just wants to use her platform to shed light on the many other Palestinian women and children just like her who are behind Israeli bars or who are just languishing in this untenable and oppressive, brutal occupation. So she's just an example of millions. That's what she always says.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.